Good morning, people of Earth. Paul here, coming at you with a crypto coffee update and a little bit of a scratchy throat because of some allergies, but nonetheless, we are pressing forward with all of the news, events, conferences, everything that you may find particularly interesting with this exciting new digital financial technology space that we're calling crypto. And of course, the key to success in this space is nothing other than copious amounts of caffeine. Totally kidding there, but it definitely helps, and so I would implore you to join me in what we call our simultaneous sip. Cheers. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's jump into what we have open in front of us. First of which is our lovely website, CryptideCast. 15-second tour for anyone first joining us. Let me first welcome you and say thank you for checking out our lovely channel and website. You can check the news and the videos over on the right-hand side, and the news section is filled with not only things that we discuss here in the Crypto Coffee videos, but even more relevant articles that I find while reading over the news throughout the day. And for the blog section, we have next week's crypto, which is filled with all of the lovely conferences and events happening all around the world, aggregated in one convenient location for you, the dear user, that you can attend if you so desire. Alright, that's CryptideCast. Check us out at your earliest convenience. And now on to your feature presentation, which is Block Tower Capital's CIO, Ari Paul, saying that Bitcoin is much, much bigger than the Bitcoin blockchain, and that's something that I'll have to agree with, and you'll see why here momentarily. Now, this article is primarily a collection of the tweets that Ari tweeted out, so in good old Cryptide fashion, doing our own research, we're going to seek out the main source here, which is Twitter itself. Excuse me. Alright, so here's how Ari is using his lingo. At the top, you have a database, which is just a collection of any kind of data or information in any particular order. Think SQL. Below that, you have what's called a ledger, which is a collection of information, generally chronological in ordering between parties, generally transactions. Below that, you have a blockchain. Now, a Bitcoin is the first distributed blockchain, but a blockchain is just a particular way in which data, generally data from a ledger, is ordered. So, beyond being the first distributed blockchain, Bitcoin's major innovation was tokenizing the distributed blockchain and solving what's called the Byzantine generals problem, or the double spend problem, by using proof of work as a mechanism to ensure that all individuals have what's called skin in the game, using game theory. Now, the big takeaway from this tweet, I think, starts around here. It says that essentially permissioned ledgers have been around for a long, long time, which is true. Think about your doctor's office and how these closed networks send information back and forth to one another. If another computer or another section of the network wants to be added to the existing network, it has to petition for permission from an administrator. So this is what Bitcoin has done differently. It has created an open network that anyone can join so long as they have skin in the game and a stake in the Bitcoin blockchain. So rather, these industries, think again your hospital or existing industries around the world, they simply never implemented other types of permissioned distributed ledgers that have been around for 50 plus years now. So these databases and these distributed ledgers that are permissioned or whitelisted, they've been around for a long, long time. However, Bitcoin, the first distributed open ledger, that has caused a lot of ruckus in the space and is kind of shining some light on what Ari calls the comically obsolete systems that many of these industries are contemporarily using. 99% of the benefits that will accrue to these industries from implementing permissioned blockchains, it would have come from implementing any other type of permission distributed ledger. But if the sexiness of blockchain finally forces a general database upgrade, good. Again, this is something that I definitely agree with. A while back, I was sending some medical information to a medical professional, and they asked, hey, we want these documents to be sensitive and, ensure that they're secure. Send them via Gmail. That's not even as secure as Proton Mail, and it's not even encrypted per se. So with that in mind, there definitely needs to be an overhaul in best practice and how this kind of sensitive data is handled. After all, at least here in the US, we had a breach of what's called Equifax, which led to over 150 million, more than half of the country's data being poured out into the open market for pretty much anybody to access. So definitely needs to be some kind of upgrade to ensure the security and validity of the existing databases around the world. And they've been around for 50 years. Funny enough, it's been said there's nothing new under the sun, and while that's not particularly true, I want to draw attention to a very interesting device that perhaps people don't know about that may help to accentuate that idea. It's called the Aeolifile, and it's just like a steam engine kind of toy. And I say it's a toy, but in all reality, it is from the 1st century AD when it was first described in the Hero of Alexandria. It's in Roman Egypt, essentially. and it was viewed as a child's toy. And here's a video I pulled up so we can get an idea of exactly what it looks like. I'm going to turn this volume down so it doesn't deafen us. But yeah, it's just heat in a contained little bronze or copper container with two little things that come out the side, and the steam ultimately drives it and accelerates it because of the amount of pressure trying to escape the small little area on the ends of each of these things that protrude out from the circular container that holds the water. So basically, I say all that in a long-winded way to say in the first century, we almost invented the steam engine. For all intents and purposes, the steam engine and all of the mechanisms and moving parts needed to utilize this, it was in place. You could use it. However, due to many historical confluences and factors, this lovely little device was labeled nothing more than a child's toy with rather novel application and interest that extended not too far beyond the whimsical notion of children's playtime. So with that said, it's interesting to see that now after 50 plus years, these permission databases are being implemented, similar to how the EOLA file took another almost 2,000 years to become relevant in human technology. Perhaps this too will have a huge mushrooming out and pushing forward of human innovation, bringing us up into truly the 21st century in terms of digital technology. Now, with that said, let's move on to some more news of the day. Exclusive, My Crypto CEO, Taylor Monahan, we talked about her a few videos ago, says that Ethereum dApps are a hot mess. And again, something I'm going to have to agree with this nice lady on, because it is a nightmare to use anything more than a handful of Ethereum dApps. And that she largely goes into this in the article, which we won't go too much into detail in just for the sake of brevity, but suffice to say the primary issue is moving from dApp to dApp to dApp interface without having a homogeneous network by which you can interact with these dApps through. Said another way, if I want to use Augur, I have to log into Augur. If I want to use Viewly, I have to log into Viewly. If I want to use any other digital platform or dApp that is on the Ethereum network, I have to natively access that platform. While that's not necessarily a bad thing per se, it definitely means that there's a level of complication for users, including things like MetaMask and all these other third-party applications that are needed to interact with the Ethereum network that make it decidedly not a very sexy thing to interact with. It's clunky, it's difficult, it's not user-friendly, and very similar to sending an email back in the early 80s. Which that actually took a command line thing. I heard Zuku talking about that in an interview, What Bitcoin Did. Fantastic podcast, by the way. You had to use a command line interface to send an email, very similar to what we have here on the Ethereum network nowadays. Again, not going to go into insane amounts of detail, but definitely worth reading this article. It offers a great insight from somebody who works on a third-party Ethereum wallet that is heavily used and allows users to interact with the Ethereum network in a more seamless way. This is her full time. It's a great take on exactly what the issues the Ethereum network is facing from a user perspective. It kind of gets us out of the whole Ethereum 2.0 Constantinople delay programming perspective that we've really been looking at recently. So good change of pace there. We also have the Philippines launching a two-way ATM for crypto, which is very, very interesting as well. We talked previously a couple episodes ago about how New York, they received, or they granted rather, a BIT license, which is a license to do business using cryptocurrencies for a Liberty X, I believe it was, a particular ATM company. And Chicago got a similar license. However, in the third world, second world, whatever you want to call it, essentially less developed nations, they have a much more, accepting, readily available mindset in terms of accessing this kind of digital technology, simply because the existing infrastructure hasn't been created yet. So it's really exciting to see the Philippines jumping onto something like this. They have the backing of a bank, and they're rolling out this technology, assumingly this year. Joseph Young is the individual who broke this information. He's a really good Twitter account, also worth a follow, by the way. So yeah, with that said, that's kind of the meat of the matter. Just goes into some detail about how the banks are interacting with it and what it may look like. There's a sexy little ATM there for you. So yeah, once again, that's the big takeaway there from my perspective, is that these less developed countries are more flexible in terms of their acceptance of these kind of digital payment systems, and they're rolling out the infrastructure to back that up. Now, $3 trillion hedge fund industry should have 1% in Bitcoin, claims Novogratz. That one always trips me up. So Novogratz, he's saying that it's a logical position to have about 1% of a hedge fund in Bitcoin, simply to hedge from any particular moves upward. So let's say that Fidelity, for instance, they started mining Bitcoin in 2015. I'm sure they were extremely happy when they saw the price of Bitcoin skyrocket in 2017, and I'm assuming that if it was possible, I mean, they are an entity. They were probably able to liquidate some of their capital, considering that they have a very, very good team put together there, and probably profited quite heavily off of that, if not selling all the way up. Now, assumingly echoing that exciting time, Michael Novogratz, it always gets me, guys. Novogratz says that it is definitely something worth considering. It's logical, as he calls it. I don't know how you would apply formal logic to a portfolio like that per se, not my area of expertise, but it would be worth it to have a 1% stake in Bitcoin. This is something I'm torn about. I'd love to get you guys' opinions below in the comments or over on the Discord. This intrigues me because part of me says, yes, that's a reasonable position, especially with a high-risk asset. You want to be getting into these new exciting digital technologies. Bitcoin's a great one. However, given that these entities are relatively conservative, especially with how they handle their funds, Bitcoin is still very young comparative to many other projects. It's really a blip on the radar, considering, yes, it's a decade old, and it feels like a long time with the level of innovation that's come out of this, but really any technical mishap could cause some major issues with this kind of thing, and especially even if it's just 1% of a portfolio, the level of due diligence required to ensure that these investments are being properly managed and secured is very difficult, especially for such a large institution who has fiduciary responsibility. The level of complication that this is going to entail for any institution that takes Novogratz's advice could ultimately extend beyond the reasonable benefit of the price going up. Because even if you have a price double per se, you have to look at the infrastructure that needs to be created to ensure security, have sufficient experts to monitor this kind of thing and say, hey, look, we just had a fork to a Bitcoin Cash, for example. What does that mean? What do I do? How do I ensure that my crypto is secure? We spent all this time ensuring that our Bitcoin holdings are safe and secure. Now what's Bitcoin Cash? So you can imagine that for the uninitiated, especially with other fiduciary responsibilities, investing even just 1% in a digital asset that's relatively unproven, decade on, right? It could be, or rather, it can entail a cost that isn't necessarily apparent on the surface, especially with the research and development needed to assure fiduciary responsibility. Now, that may be less of an issue going forward. You can see here NYSE Operator's crypto platform, backed, as we talk about semi-frequently here. They have finalized one of their first acquisitions. They're buying part of what's called RCG, which is Rosenthal Collins Group. We've talked about this a few months back when they first had the announcement, but it seems as though they're finally finalizing it, and this is going to allow Bakkt to much more fluidly implement AML and KYC, which is anti-money laundering and know your customer policies. So because of this, perhaps you can see Novogratz's opinion, 1% of institutional money holding Bitcoin, becoming more of a reasonable, viable alternative, especially if you have third-party managers that are custodial accounts, such as Bakkt, to handle the security on behalf of these institutions. And again, a lot of these things happen in fits and starts, so there's no one-size-fits-all, but seeing these kind of institutions step up to the plate and say, hey, we are huge institutions, we understand that you other institutions have needs relative to these digital assets, and you want to involve yourselves in them, let us serve as a custodial entity. That could very reasonably see larger moves occurring. I was watching a podcast with Ari Paul, and he said, my prediction was 12 months. It could look more like 24 months now, just because of some of the regulatory clarity and some of the implications with entities such as these building their own custodial services. So who knows, maybe end of 2019, maybe halfway through 2020, maybe even 2021. Let me know what you guys think below in the comments when these kind of institutions can start making their inroads and we can start actually feeling the effect on these networks, such as Bitcoin. All right, so the main issues of the day, well, not issues per se, some issues, mostly stories. Mt. Gox, you all may remember it as the now defunct cryptocurrency exchange that went kaput in 2013. The reason being they were illiquid relative to the amount of holdings they should have had. So that's not good. It was the first big example of a cryptocurrency exchange going down due to a lack of liquidity. And unfortunately at the time, Mt. Gox was holding, I think it was 90-something% of total Bitcoin in terms of ability to transact, not private wallets or anything. And what that means is if you were on another crypto exchange, they were just using Mt. Gox essentially on your behalf. So when Mt. Gox went down, it was a nightmare. It entered civil rehabilitation for years and years, all the way up until, I believe it was late 2017, early 2018, when the first individuals were able to start receiving some of their Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, back. That was exciting. I mean, just imagine. You're basically forced to hold for years and years, and the amount of the dollar value, rather, of the Bitcoin you held appreciated significantly. So this presented a very unique case for Japan, which is the jurisdiction in which civil rehabilitation was undertaken. It had some huge implications because Japan had no idea how to handle this. I mean, normally they're used to an asset that will appreciate or depreciate relatively within a relatively reasonable range, right? Well, when you look at Bitcoin, you think, okay, you were buying these coins. How much were they worth? $200. Okay, wait, they're worth how much now? 10,000? What the hell? So it really added a unique facet and element to civil rehabilitation, as the underlying asset had appreciated significantly relative to other fiat currencies. And so, because of some of this complication, an individual very popular in the space known as Brock Pierce, he says that he has a legal claim to the exchange, having previously bought out shares from other individuals who owned shares of Mt. Gox. And now his idea is to create a new version of Mt. Gox in order to not only go through civil rehabilitation, but ensure that all individuals who were affected by the collapse in early 2014, it seems it was early 2014, so it wasn't 2013, they kept going for a little bit after, kind of chugging along, limping a little bit. He wants to make sure that the resulted loss of 850,000 Bitcoin, valued at roughly $460 million at the time, is given back to the individuals who essentially own it and deserve it. But again, that's kind of a loaded question and a loaded term, because not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Rough situation overall. But apparently Brock Pierce wants to do the right thing, but not all is as it seems. Here's a great podcast, by the way, everything below in the description. In Brock Pierce's own words, this goes on for about 45 minutes to an hour. Just over an hour. And it's just an interview with Brock Pierce talking about the new Mt. Gox Rising, some of the civil rehabilitation suits, and some of his spats, legally and otherwise, that he's had with individuals who. And this is the great drama component of crypto. You can't have any reasonable length of time in crypto without some drama. Individuals saying that they didn't actually sell their shares of Mt. Gox, and so Brock Pierce can't reopen it. Here is a Twitter thread so you can get some information about it. Brock Pierce saying that he's going to revive Mt. Gox. Mark Carpeles, it's, these last names, I'm telling you. Basically, Mark says no, he did not ever draft a purchase agreement. This didn't happen. Brock Pierce doesn't actually own those shares of Mt. Gox. And Brock Pierce responds, and they have a nice back and forth not so nice back and forth. They basically have a back and forth about the legal implications as to whether or not Brock can open Mt. Gox. As said, you can't have any reasonable length of time in especially crypto Twitter without some kind of drama. So really, this is up in the air right now, guys. Will Mt. Gox reopen? A lot of people are saying just don't leave that piece of crypto history behind us. Definitely not what a lot of individuals in crypto, especially those around at the time, want to be associated with. But suffice to say, Brock is pushing forward nonetheless, and he's trying to do it in a way that makes him look like he's trying to essentially give money back to those who deserve it. But it's open to interpretation, really, especially with this back and forth. You can read it for yourself in the description below, but let me know what you think. Is this a good thing? Do we need Mt. Gox rising? Hopefully never again to fall if it does indeed rise? Let me know. All right, so next up we have another major story of the day, ASICs. ASICs. That is a constant question and issue here in the crypto world. It stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit. What does it do? So when you're running a computer, kind of like I'm assuming you're watching me now on a computer, it's got to do a lot of things. You got all kinds of different components that are interacting with one another to give you the most optimized experience possible. Well, when you are mining cryptocurrency, you don't necessarily need to have an optimal video streaming experience. What you need to do one thing and one thing specifically, and that is solve these algorithms to mine this crypto. So that's how we ended up with application-specific integrated circuits. It is an actual chip itself, a little microchip, or sometimes maybe even a macro chip, little chip that has information that says what the computer should be doing. And so what they did is over time, first started with Bitcoin. Once it became profitable, developers, hardware engineers built these chips that said, look, we can mine Bitcoin far more efficiently than any CPU or GPU, for that matter, could ever do. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to roll these out onto the network. Now, ultimately, this increased the amount of hash power present on the network, which means that it requires more hashing power to 51% attack Bitcoin. So initially, a lot of people thought, hey, this is great. We got more hashing power. Fantastic. However, as you can imagine, not everybody can afford an ASIC, nor does everybody want to run an ASIC. So because of this, it led to a relative centralization of mining power. Now, going back to Ari Paul's claim saying that this is game theory and you have to have skin in the game, this to some individuals meant that, well, that's not so bad. You can have relative centralization without having too big of an issue. However, other cryptocurrency projects said, look, this is going to lead to a level of centralization in which it's going to ultimately be more profitable for companies and individuals who build these ASICs to cooperate rather than compete. And as we've seen with EOS and many other systems, when you have an incentive model that allows you to profit more greatly from cooperation rather than competition, that's ultimately what leads to collusion. And that's what Monero thinks as well. However, despite the fact that Monero has forked previously away from these ASICs, bricking them, which essentially means turning them into nothing more than expensive paperweights because what they were specifically designed to do is no longer allowed on the network, despite this fact, 85% of the Monero network is yet again dominated by ASICs. So it seems as though within the time frame allotted, every 6 months Monero wants to have a hard fork. It's not enough time. It needs to be more frequently in order to get away from these machines that a lot of the time unfortunately mine secretly. After all, if you can have a competitive advantage and a comparative advantage against other miners on the network because you are using a machine that offers disproportionate amounts of hashing power on a specific network, you would want to keep that kind of a trade secret, especially if the culture of the network on which you are mining is against that kind of technology. So within the last 40 days, it's gone from X amount to 85%. So it's just going up and up and up and up slowly over time because, again, it's a profitable move to do. I mean, a lot of these things are doing so, or a lot of these ASICs are mining in a kind of secret way. This is a fantastic article from one of my favorite outlets, Crypto Slate. They always just have such great pieces, and this goes into stuff about obfuscated nonces, etc., and kind of the more technical aspects of how these kind of things are hidden. But just, again, for the sake of brevity, we're not going to go into all the details here, and I did aggregate some more resources to help embellish the situation. Monero will fork at a specific block on March 9th, so just a heads up for anybody using Monero, they are going to be forking yet again to get away from these ASICs and empower CPU and GPU miners. So it's happening yet again. And this is something that is it's really up for debate, and it's all about the culture of the specific project. I, for one, think forking away from ASICs is a futile effort. It is trying to escape a subset of technology that is ultimately going to be a game of cat and mouse, and it detracts from developers' efforts to build the best network they can possibly build. After all, if these developers are supposed to be working on a improvement for their network, when in all reality they have to pivot and split their time 50-50 between working on hard forks and ASIC resistance and algorithms and that sort of thing, ultimately it's detracting from the upgrades to the network. And that's something that Scicoin seems to echo. Monero has had secret ASICs for months and months, as previously stated. My strong guess is that Monero is going to have another round of secret ASICs built, and that these ASICs will be more conservative and flexible, attempting to follow the hard forks that Monero puts out every 6 months. Again, a game of cat and mouse. And this is from David Vorick. He is the one of the head developers of Scicoin, very competent individual. And Scicoin is one of those cautionary tales as I see it, because Scicoin created a company called Obelisk that was supposed to be their own native ASIC miners, while at the same time bricking Bitmain miners. This led to all kinds of questions, such as, well, how decentralized are you really if you have a company associated with your network that is the only company that is able to mine with ASICs? That seems to be a level of favoritism and profiteering. And again, even if you brick these Bitmain ASICs, what's going to stop them from doing exactly what David claimed here with Monero, having a more conservative and flexible type of chip that ultimately runs concurrent with the network upgrades that are made to dissuade from these ASICs. Here's a great talk from David himself. I pulled it from another article here, which is my take on progressive proof of work. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, David has a great talk all about these ASICs. Here's David himself, has some great talk about hardware design, chip design, and kind of how these mechanisms affect the network, and how relatively, I really am wary to use the word simple, but it is comparatively simple to play this game of cat and mouse. Of course, huge amounts of people far smarter than myself, with huge amounts of technical expertise in this field and beyond, software included, are working on this kind of stuff. So with that said, take the idea of it being simple with a grain of salt. It's more so readily accessible, I guess I could say. So the last piece we have is the this individual, Alexei Akonov's take on Prog Proof of Work, which is the progressive proof of work proposal that's been put out for the Ethereum network. And he's looking for a reasonable answer to some questions. And we can scroll down here, and really claim 3 is what has some comparative relevancy to what we were just talking about. Hardware design shops are getting better at what they do. Here's that video link to David's talk. Essentially, David is beneficial as an example because he shows that it does not take very long, about 1 to 2 years, for a very good software developer to learn enough about hardware design to set up a design shop. So the implications for this is not so much that, oh, well, this means that, yeah, all these crypto projects can make their own ASICs. What it means is that the bridge between software and hardware really isn't as long as some individuals may think, and as these entities become more profitable, individuals who are very competent at software may see the monetary incentive to become involved in hardware and lend their expertise towards building these secret ASICs. After all, if you have an understanding of how software works and how these engineers may indeed try and obfuscate from ASICs on their network, you can have a better understanding as to how to better build these kind of machines and in turn take advantage of the rules that are being set in place. And claim 4 also makes sense. Pursuit of ASIC resistance is a strategy of denial that can hurt more than help. And this largely just echoes what I kind of just said, is the idea that ASIC resistance is, you know, hey, there's nothing you can do to prevent being labeled as a bad actor if you're using ASICs. We don't want you to develop your hardware, and if we see that you've succeeded, we'll try to do another proof of work change, so you cannot sell your hardware and go out of business, which is not a very reasonable answer. It can hurt more than it can help. Again, something I echo heavily, and I'm very interested to see what you as a community and individuals say about this, because I kind of have my information about ASICs, and that's how I see it. Really, you can't stop the progress of technology, but there's plenty of information out there, and this is just one man's opinions and perspectives. So let me know what you think below in the comments or over on the Discord. Always fantastic information going on there. And of course, as said, check out our website, CryptideCast. Always good information there to keep you up to date on the happenings. But with that said, that's all we have today. My name is Paul. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really, this community would not be what it is at all without your support. And just leaving a comment, leaving a share really means the world. So thanks again. My name is Paul, signing off. We are Cryptide, and make no mistake, folks, the tide is rising. As is the hashing power if we leave these ASICs rolling, huh?